Returning to this subject, there is another one that I mentioned prior in the previous video that I wanted to talk a little bit more about, because he's also a little bit messy, but he's also been around for a much longer time than Athelia, and that is Malacath. Now, I mentioned in my previous Reconciling Athelia video that if we changed the story a little bit, just tweaked it a little bit, tweaked it just a little bit, we could be able to say that Malacath is the 16th prince that replaced Athelia in the Merethic era. How one faded from memory after whatever Mora did, and in that vacuum, roughly around the same time, there was Malacath. And people remembered Malacath. People knew who Malacath was, and people also knew who Trinimac was, and all of that other good stuff. And that, in the sudden void, in the suddenly sudden void of the absence of Athelia's sphere and memory of Athelia, even from her fellow Daedra and Magna Gi, there would be Malacath to fill this void. He would become a Daedric prince by chance, really. And I wanted to talk about Malacath a little bit more, because he's very interesting to me. And in fact, almost all these guys are interesting to me. There's so many concepts of this world that from a writing standpoint, the meta, the philosophy, the theologies, everything that goes into the inspiration of making this, and even the creative idea of not making anything concrete, is fascinating to me. And I might even agree that we shouldn't make anything concrete, because that would defeat the purpose of mythopoeia, mythology, and myth-making in and of itself. Now we have the mythopoeia meta going on here, where in the real world, we are creating a mythology. We are creating the myth in a fictional realm. We are creating the deities, we are populating the worlds, we are myth-making, as it will. And we have a lot of scrapped ideas, previous incarnations, and a bunch of other stuff, right? We have a bunch of these things here. And then in-universe, we have mythopoeia going on. So we have out-of-character and in-character mythopoeia. In lore and in real life, out of lore, the person writing the story, and then there's a writer in the story's world writing the stories. Mythopoeia meta is what I like to call it. Layers of mythological myth-making. We have a person in-universe looking at an old mythology, looking at an old pantheon, and decides to rewrite the pantheon, to remake the pantheon, to redo it, to make new deities or change names even, such as Anuel, Ariel, Akatosh. We're going to be talking about him next. But there's things like this going on, and there's a lot of conflicting stories going on, and nothing is viewed as certain. And at least for Malacath's sake, there's quite a few extra stories and myths, and nothing is certain for him, probably because he wasn't there from the beginning. In the beginning, there was Arena, the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena, which did not start out as it is today. It was originally something else completely different. And then they just stuck with the name Roger Corman style, but had to do something different. So they just said, oh, no, Tamriel is just called the Arena. There's just something else here. You know, they're doing all sorts of stuff like that. And in Arena, there was no Malacath. The orcs were merely enemies for you to kill, and that was simply it. And that was all. By Daggerfall, there was Orsinium in the Daggerfall area, the Iliac Bay, and a bunch of orcs were around, hanging about, And they have Malacath hanging about. Malacath has got his own origin story finally, and all of this stuff gets solidified and more mythologicalized by Morrowind and Redguard, that we finally get to see the full scope of who this guy is. But then we get more creation myths. Many creation myths, many of them. A couple of them. I'm just going to go over a couple of them, because there's so many that there are probably some that I don't know yet, and there are some that I can't remember off the top of my head. Here's the ones that I remember off the top of my head. 1. Trinimac is the hero, deity, elder spirit, et ada, and companion and loyal knight of Ariel, of the Eldmeri Aedra. Because the Aedra and Daedra are Eldmeric terminology here. In this regard, it literally means, Aedra means our ancestors, Daedra means not our ancestors. Meaning, from the Aedra, they were the spirits and et ada that populated the world, and then they were forced to procreate in order to survive. And then each generation they were less powerful, less godlike, etc., etc., etc. And then they got more numerous, and then they became the Enolfey, and then you have the Wandering Enolfey. There are 2 sets of Aedra here, 2 sets of ancestors, if you will, here. And both of them are combined into the 8 divines through Saint Alessia. You see, before the Slave Queen Rebellion, there was only the Aldmeri, or the Elven pantheons. You know, they made the Nedic humans worship the Elven pantheons. They forgot their old stuff. Some of them might have some totems or whatever, but for the most part, they were worshipping Elven gods. They were worshipping Elven deities, such as Trinimac and Ariel and all of that good stuff, right? And then the Aedra, in this regards, where Trinimac is concerned, is the elven ancestors, not the human ones. See, some of the 8 divines, like Kain, Mara, they would be classified as human Aedra. The Aedra who did procreate and then create the Wandering Enolfey, right? They are not the ancestors of the Aldmer, elven peoples. You know, there's 2 sets, if you will. One set worked with Lorkhan, one set worked with Ariel, right? The Trinimac worked with Ariel, so he's of the elven ancestor Aedra's spirits. He's not of the men ones, right? And way back when, in the Dawn era, with the creation of all of the things, of the aspects and all of that good stuff, the creation of Tamriel was, not just Tamriel, the creation of Nirn the Mundus and everything was being conceptualized. And during this era, there are a lot of strange things going on. This is the era where you could say everything everywhere all at once and still be right. And you wouldn't be wrong, because we have no sources to contradict you. We just have other stories that might contradict other stories, but we don't know if those other stories are real either. So all of the stories are there in the Dawn era, told in the Dawn era, and technically, from an out-of-universe perspective, this could also be all the other ideas posited in the writer's room during the cacophony of madness these monkeys were talking about in this big room, talking about all these other ideas, saying, oh, what if this world looked like this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And then the other guy in the other room, on the other side of the room, was going like, no, that's stupid. Let's do this. We're gonna do all of this. We're gonna have this here. We have these guys do this. And then this other guy comes in and says, what if we had these guys do this? And what if we had these guys do this? And what if they had a fight, right? What if they fought? And then everybody's having a bunch of ideas thrown together in this writer's room, and we all throw all of that in. Everything everybody said. Let's throw it all into the Dawn era. That way nobody can confirm if anything anybody said is real. Everything's true. Same story, different version, but all are true. And that's where Trinimac and Lorkhan's big fight come into play. We have Lorcan creating the Mundus for whatever purpose he wants. From the Morrowind perspective, with the Kirkbridean Morrowind perspective and all this other stuff, we have Lorcan perceiving the tower way back when, after being conceptualized by Sithis, the child of Patamaic origins and all that stuff. Auriel is the child of Anu. Anu more aspect origins, you know. And so Lorcan beheld the tower on its side, beheld all of that stuff, and learned the secrets, but did not achieve beyond the Kimi. He did not get that. And some say it's because it's on purpose. He had a purpose for the Mundus. He had a purpose for mortals. He had a purpose for the spirits. He had a purpose for all of that stuff. He wanted everybody else to realize this stuff. He wanted to set the path and all that stuff. The trial of Lorcan, as Boethia and Mephala would tell their followers. And Boethia is a very important person in this story, because Boethia is the person that the joke is, after Trinamac ripped out Lorcan's heart, after everybody had a fight, after the Mundus was created, in the age of the Elven Age, the Elven aspects, ancestors, the Elven Age on Ariel's side said, "Hey, man, you tricked us, man. Dude, why did you do... we don't like this, man." And so Trinamac comes over to Lorcan, they have a fight, they have a big fight. But, you know, that's just being very simplifying here. There's been, like kalpas of cycles and cycles of wars during the Dawn Era, you know. And there's quite a few of these stories mentioning Trinamac, mentioning Lorcan, mentioning the Nordic aspect of Lorcan, known as Shor. There's a couple out of canon universe stuff written by Kirkbride long after he was off contract. So one of those stories is called Shor, Son of Shor, which I honestly really like this story. I really do. It's basically a dude named Shor, son of Shor, also named Shor. There's a Kine, probably daughter of Kine, also named Kine, Mara of Mara. And that kind of might make sense in a literal sense, where the deities procreated to recreate themselves, because they were now mortal, so they had to recreate themselves. And so all of the previous incarnations of Shor exist somewhere. And so Shor, son of Shor, goes to talk to his father and all the other aspects of his father, the big aspect of Shor. And that's all pretty fun. But Trinamac's also in this story, and he's on the Ariel side, fighting against the Lorcan Shor's side and all that good stuff. So we have no idea what's going on here. We have no idea what's going on in the Dawn Era. This story could be actually in the Dawn Era. It would fit, because everything fits, because nothing can actually be said for certain, because to give a definitive answers to defeat the purpose of the Dawn Era, of what this era means in the grand expanse of creation, from a meta standpoint. Once we explain the meta and ruin the meta, you ruin the concept, you ruin the story. You cannot give definitive answers here. All of them are true. They all have to be true. Pick one you like, and then that one's fine. That one's true. Pick it if you want. And that's what ended up happening here with Trinamac. One of the stories is Trinamac rips out Lorcan's heart. Ariel throws the heart across the world with the bow and all that good stuff. The heart drips across the land. These drips become keystones to certain towers. One of those keystones being the Kimel Adabal, which ends up being the Amulet of Kings, which contains a drop of Lorcan's blood. That's something I want to make. We're going to be talking about that with the Akatosh and Talos perspective videos, and I'm going to be making videos soon. So right now we're still talking about Malacath and Trinamac right now. So Trinamac does this, and Ariel does that. And then, for a while, things are good. Everybody's going about their business, and we get into the Merethic era. Trinamac's still around, and the elves are starting to be getting dreams and whispers from Boethia and Mephala. And Veloth, the wise, the Velothi elves, he's preaching to his people, and he's starting to bring them out. He's starting to get them to consider leaving the Somerset Isles, or Alinor, as it was known. And he's trying to get them to go elsewhere into the mainland or whatever, right? Following some other elves' footsteps or whatnot. And so Trinamac's like, hey man, don't do that. Hey man, don't do that. Don't. We guys gotta stick together, right? We gotta stick together. And so Boethia shows up. Veloth crawls for Boethia, and Boethia answers, and she shows up, and they have a fight. Boethia and Tritomac have a fight, and she eats him. The popular story, and the one that's widely picked up by the people of Tamriel, is that Boethia eats him, and then craps him out as a fecal matter, and the corpse in the fecal matter revives himself as Malacath. He's changed, he's corrupted, he's angry. Tritomac becomes Malacath, reborn as Malacath, as the aspect of Malacath. And probably because he absorbed some of the powers of Boethia by going through Boethia's system and being crapped out, so as to say. And then, of course, we have a couple other perspectives here. One story says that Boethia and Tritomac fought in the Dawn era, and that whatever happened in the Merethic era was somebody else known as Malak. Malak, King of Curses, whatever the guy's name is, Malak something. And so Malak was disguised as Tritomac. He had a bunch of followers. He's often viewed as the greatest of the elven ancestors. He's the biggest, strongest guy. He's probably even stronger than Ariel at this point. And that shouldn't be able to happen. So it's something tricky, something fishy must be going on, right? And so Boethia shows up, same time Velothi calls for Boethia. Boethia comes up, and then she removes the Dwemer, the Dweomer, and that's a Forgotten Realms terminology term. The Dweomer, I think, Dwemer. It's basically an illusion. She breaks the illusion, and the Tritomac becomes Malak to everybody looking at him. And then all of Malak's followers who thought they were following Tritomac turn into the orcs at the exact same time. And Boethia speaks in Tritomac's voice and all this stuff, speaks to all that. There's a bunch of hooey that I'm not gonna get into. But basically, she convinces them to leave. Basically, she convinces Velothi's followers and all this stuff. The Chimer head on out. They head on out, and the orcs are created as well, and they're all angry because Tritomac and because Malacath, who was disguised as Tritomac, was revealed to be Malak, and so they all still worship Malacath, because when Boethia and Malak have a fight, she still eats him and then craps him out, and it's Malacath on the ground, who was Malak, not Tritomac. So Tritomac died in the Dawn era, and this is just another guy called Malak. That's just another story. And then we have another story entirely, where you could talk to Malacath himself, and Malacath says, everybody's taking that a little bit too literally. That's not exactly what happened. And so that leads me to speculate a possible other story here. What if the inside of Boethia thing is being taken too literally? What if it's more metaphorical? As we learn, the Daedric realms of the Daedra are technically the Daedra themselves. Being inside of Boethia's Daedric realm would technically be akin to being inside Boethia, from a certain point of view. So who is to say that Boethia didn't just consume Tritomac or Malak, whoever you want, and throw them into her Daedric sphere, throw them into her Daedric realm? And we have to know, time does not operate the way we think it does, as we know it does on the Tamriel. Time does not operate in Oblivion in this way, unless the Daedric Lord just wants it to. For example, in the Shivering Isles, because the developers couldn't really make some plane really, really ethereal and weird and kooky, they came up with the idea that time could operate similar to Tamriel if the Daedric Lord wanted it to. And so they said that Sheogorath simply wanted time to operate like it was in Tamriel. So you had a day and a night sequence exactly like it was in Cyrodiil on the main map in Oblivion, out of a limitation in the engine. They couldn't exactly make such a super duper, except they did. They made the Deadlands. You could explode the whatever. Whatever. So they made it like that, sun and moon, all that stuff. Time can operate like it does, but only if the Daedric Prince wants it to. What if time is relative, and if, for example, Boethia wanted somebody to experience centuries, thousands, possibly even millions of years and years of torment and torture and pain in her sphere? She's torturing this guy for a very long time in her Daedric realm. And yet for everybody on Tamriel, barely a second has passed. Right? Barely a second has passed. Boethia craps out. This person, having gotten bored of him, she's been torturing him for so long, so she spits him back out. And for every onlooker's perspective, barely a second has passed. But what if, from Malacath's perspective, he has been tortured, he has been imprisoned for such a very, 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 very long time that his mind has broken. Even his aspect of identity has broken. He knows only Malacath now. He rises from the ground as Malacath. His Daedric sphere is the Ash Pit. And we learned that the Daedric sphere can be molded and changed to be whatever that Daedric Lord wants it to be. And we learned that Boethia casts Malacath, Trinimac, Malacath, Malak, whoever you want to whichever mythology story you would want to pick for this story, Trinimac or Malak. She grabs him and tosses him into an ash pit looking place, an ash pit looking prison to imprison him in. Why is Malacath's realm reminiscent, looking identical to his prison? Could this potentially mean all of that self-hatred that is consuming this Daedric Lord, that he is now... He makes his realm reminiscent of his prison because of this, because of his self-hatred, right? He has a little garden, though. He's got a little garden in the middle of his little realm. It's nice, little pretty little trees and all stuff, but the sky is gray. It's absent of color. His memory of Tamriel isn't really very vivid. So his little realm inside his little garden inside his ash pit is barely a mimic of the pretty radiant gardens that he remembers of Tamriel, the Mundus of Nerd. And perhaps during his tenure as being imprisoned in this dark, deep, dark prison that Boethia threw him in, perhaps he learned his lesson. Perhaps Malacath has paid for his sins through this incarceration and change from Trinimac into Malacath. And he has learned to appreciate the mortal realm for how pretty and beautiful it actually is, now that he's no longer able to walk among it as Trinimac anymore. Perhaps now he finally realizes the beauty that Lorcan and all the other Daedra created. In this sense, Trinimac, Malacath, the Malak could be a Daedra. Malak could be a Daedra in this case. In this origin story, Malak could be a Daedric Lord disguised as Trinimac and Aedra and Ed-Ada. And when Malak is thrown in here, Malak becomes Malacath. Being a Daedric prince works because Malak was a Daedra. But Trinimac is a little bit of a complication. He's technically an Aedra. But then again, not all Daedric princes are created equal. We have different origin stories for a bunch of these guys, although admittedly a lot of this stuff comes out during the decade of ESO from 2014 to 2025. We have quite a bit of lore that gets added in every other year by Zenimax Studios for ESO. And one of those is Meridia being changed from being just a Daedric prince to being one of the Magna Gi. The Magna Gi are the children of Magnus, who is an Ed-Ada spirit. He's not an Aedra because he chose to leave Nirn before the conception of time and all of that stuff, the convention of time. He chose to leave with his Magna Gi. Meridia is one of the few that decided to stay in the Orbic Circle, in the Orbic Wheel, and not flee with Magnus to wherever he went. She decided to stay down here. She carved a sphere in oblivion for herself. She's in Magna Gi. She's not necessarily But then again, technically she is a Daedra. Technically, if we go literally by the Aldmeri definition, Aedra simply only means the people that are their ancestors. The Magnagi and these technically Daedra lords are technically also not their ancestors. So, in this sense, we could say that there are Anuistic Magnagi. They are Anuic. They are the children of Anu. Magnus is from Anu, and from Magnus are the Magnagi, and so they're all Anuic in perspective. And technically, we usually view Daedra from a Ptolemaic perspective, like Boethia, Befala, Azura, and all these guys. They are Ptolemaic aspects, and the whole Ptolemy and Anu thing going on. That's a story for another time. That'll take forever, man. I don't want to spend 3 hours on this video. But, basically, Malacath, if he's Trinimac, is technically an Aedra. Malacath, if he's Malik, is technically a Daedra. It's all dependent upon which perspective you want to use here. And technically, from a lore-wise perspective, I lean more towards the Trinimac one. Malacath being Trinimac, being corrupted by Boethia, and from being in her plane, in her space for so long, he probably absorbed some of her powers in some aspects, in some ways, because Malacath and Boethia do share a lot of the same aspects in a lot of ways. Malacath just seems to be more honorable than Boethia. But then again, Boethia can be seen as honorable as well in her own unique way. I really want to look at Boethia a little bit more before I go into more detail about her, so I'm just going to say that they're both very similar, just Malacath is more honest. He's more honest about who he is, rather than Boethia, who's a little bit more shifty, a little bit more shady, a little bit more not revealing everything all at once. The story of Malacath is very interesting to me, because he's something of an outcast. Even in the Daedric plane of Oblivion, his fellow Daedric princes, they don't really consider him a Daedric prince. He technically isn't. They don't really consider Meridia a Daedric prince. She technically isn't. She's a Anuic Magnagi, who is also doing some Ptolemaic stuff going on. She's got a mixture of both going on right now. And Malacath has got a mixture of both going on. He was once, if he's Trinimac, he was once an Aedra et Ada spirit guy, and now he's a Daedric prince. The whole Aedra and Daedra thing is just terminology used by the elves to describe who is who. And these denominations probably don't really mean anything to the et Ada themselves. You know, they probably pick these words simply because these are the words that you know. That's why we're using them. That's why they're using them to you. Because these are the ones that you know. These are the definitions for us that you know of us. What are the actual truths that you don't know? You can't comprehend them, so we're not going to use them. And probably we just haven't figured them out yet. That's why we're not using them. This is the great part of this stuff, is that Tamriel is this living world. A living world whose lore is constantly shifting and changing, and aspects are molding, and all that good stuff. All that gooey good stuff. We can add deities in and say, oh, it happened in the Dawn era. That's fine, because the Dawn era is already a mess. Why not make it messier? It's fine. Just throw them into the Dawn era. Throw this into the Dawn era. Oh, this deity existed. It was in the Dawn era. Malacath didn't exist in Arena. Now he does in Daggerfall. Let's throw Trinimac into the Dawn era. See, this all happened in the Dawn era. And then in the Merethic era, because he wasn't around, let's just say, boom, there he is. And the reason why nobody talked about Malacath in Arena was because nobody liked the orcs at Arena. But now things are a little bit different now by Daggerfall. So now we do talk about Malacath. But out of universe, we know why, because he wasn't created yet in Arena. He was made by Daggerfall. So Malacath is Athalia's story, only 15-20 chapters older. He's something that came later after the original project was released and gets added retroactively into the big Orbic sphere. But luckily, Arena didn't really have a big story. It was just a map people were throwing things on with no real origin, no real mythology, no real backstory. And so people who got hired in for Daggerfall and later on Battlespire and Redguard started to think about that. They started to think, I have no idea where this is. Where are we? Who is that guy? Where'd they come from? Who is that guy? Where did he come from? What do these people trade in? What are these people? What animals do they live here? They started to think. And start to think, and they start to think, and they start to think, and more things gets added in. And with each new title, we keep thinking, we keep adding things. The Camoran conspiracy and all that stuff at Oblivion didn't exist until it did. Technically, Alduin and the Thu'um did technically exist before Skyrim. I think that was a Kirkbride thing that he added in somewhere, maybe by Redguard or whatever. But it wasn't actually a big, vital part of Redguard's story. It was just made by then. That was just used for here. But the idea is the story doesn't exist until it does. Even if it's something that happened a very long time ago, it's still something that didn't exist until it did. So that's how this mess has to be consolidated. And, the best way I could think to do it is the way that it's being done. Not everybody can come up with the same story. Not everybody can come up with the same agreement on where Malacath came from because nobody's really alive. Who's there? You think Boethia is going to tell you the truth? You think Malacath's going to tell you the truth? If he was actually crapped out by Boethia, you think he's going to tell you that he was? No! You can't trust the Daedra worth anything. They were around back then, sure, but nobody else was. So you can't really trust anybody's stories. These stories keep passing down through the generations. They get changed because cultures are isolated. They haven't talked to each other in thousands of years. They get different names, different stories, and depending upon where you are, so we have 15 different creation myths by the time everybody finally talks to each other. That's fine, because that's kind of how it worked in the real world. Just look at Greece and the Greek mythology. It's a mess. It's a mess. Each different area of Greece, nothing was united until Alexander grabbed everybody and said, hey, stop fighting each other. And then everybody had these different stories about Zeus, and so they decided to make them all true. And now Zeus just has 100 kids instead of, he just has one from this area. Now he's got 100 of them because there's 100 different stories about him doing 100 different things. So they all consolidated it into one. And that's what they did with the Dawn Era. That's what they did with all these creation myths, is that all these people are fallible. The mortals are fallible. The stories that they tell are fallible. Nothing is concrete, and it doesn't have to be. Malacath's here now. That's all that we have to really think about. But it's still fun to think about either way. It's still fun for me to rack my brain about it, to get it itching, to think about these things, even if we can't ever root down a concrete story of where Malacath came from. We still get a general idea. I offered a general idea. Boethia trapped him into her domain, into her Daedric domain plane of existence, and he was tortured there until his mind broke and his identity broke, and he became Malacath once she got bored of him. And then, after the disappearance of Athelia, Malacath became the new Daedric prince. That's all you really need. It doesn't really need to get any deeper than that. It doesn't need to get any bigger than that. That's a good answer. That's a good story to throw it in there just to satisfy the mythological myth-making people. Next time, I really need to talk about Akatosh.